it's a whole person or whatever, but study methods and sample methods go together. So after you get your sample, how do you go about getting your data is basically what this is. So there's 3 of these study methods. The first one, it's going to say in an observational, you have to really focus to make sure I spelled that right, observational study. What you do is you measure or observe members of the group that you've picked to be your sample. So you picked your sample, and observational study, you are just going to observe them in a way that they are not affected. Like you don't tell them what to do, you just observe. And that could be a person, that could be like you're observing bacteria. It doesn't have to be people, it could be animals, that could be bacteria, it could be all kinds of different stuff, yes.
Is it not affected?
Oh, I thought the word not was there. So they're not affected. Sorry, no, I thought the word not was there. So they're not affected by the study. So you do not interact with them in any way. It's just strictly you look to see what they're doing. Okay, the second type. This one you guys are probably more familiar with or have heard of stuff like this before. So this is going to say in a controlled experiment. You divide your sample, however you decided to get that selected, into 2 groups. And you're going to impose treatment on one group, but not the other group. The other group, they'll call that the control group. So that's just keeping, they don't get affected. Like a lot of times they'll do this when they test a new drug. They'll give half the people the drug and half the people they'll give a sugar pill. So they don't know which one is which. That's going to be a controlled experiment. So test to see the effects. Then you compare the 2 groups. You compare the control group to the group that you gave the medication or whatever it is you're testing. And then the last one is a survey. So in a survey, you ask every member of your sample a set of questions. And a survey, just to note, this could be just one question. It could be, 30 questions, but even just one question could be considered a survey. So you're asking people for their response or their opinion. All right, so I'm just going to fill these in really quick. This is going to say a poorly designed study is going to result in unreliable statistics. Am I right? Unreliable stats. So if you do not do a good job setting up your study, whatever data you collect might just be crap. So make sure you're going to design it in a good way. So we're going to talk about these examples today and how they were designed. Okay, if a study is well designed, you can assume the results are going to represent the entire population. So you're just going to do whatever your collection of data is to a sample, but if it's well designed, it can represent the entire population you're trying to look at. Okay, if this is the case, you can use that data to make general conclusions or what we call inferences about the population. That would be just general conclusions that you can draw from your data. Okay, so we are going to talk about the methods in these little examples. So it says for each situation, what type of study method? So the ones we just looked at there. And then should we use the results that they would gain from this information to make a general conclusion about the population? And again, this is just like you can argue probably one way or the other on all of these. So let me start with this one. It says researchers randomly choose 2 groups from 10 volunteers over a period of 8 weeks. One group eats ice cream before going to sleep, the other does not. Volunteers wear monitoring devices while sleeping, and researchers record their dream activity. Okay, so I would say here, I'm just going to write down the sample from yesterday. So it says they randomly choose 2 groups from 10 volunteers. So if they're choosing people from volunteers, this is a self-select in terms of the sample, because these are people that are volunteering to do this. And then they're going to randomly select. All right, now, what kind of study am I doing? And I'm doing observational, controlled experiment, or a survey. controlled experiment, because one group's going to eat ice cream and one group is not. So the study here, this is your controlled experiment. Okay, so I have volunteers of 10 people. We're going to put them into two groups randomly. Half of them are going to eat ice cream and half of them are not. If I study this and I collect data, do you think this would be valid to use this data to make a conclusion about how ice cream affects your dream activity? Like, what would be good or bad? Do you think this is a decent setup for their study? What do you think? Yeah, I would say this is not great, right? We'll be positive about it. Okay, so this is not great. This is a really small sample of people. So in that scenario, I would argue I wouldn't make any kind of general conclusions about the population and how ice cream affects their dream activity if you're only looking at 10 people, 5 of them are eating ice cream and 5 of them are not. I think this is a really small sample, but you can argue as long as you give a reason, then we're good. Okay, now this one says, students in a science class record the height of bean plants. If you ever did this in elementary school, I did. Record the heights of bean plants as they grow. Which kind of study is this? Yeah. Yes. They're just going to observe. They're not like talking to the plants or whatever. They're just observing the plants. All right, now in terms of the sample here, I would say the sample is the entire population of this class, so I wouldn't necessarily say there was a strategy here to develop a sample. This is just kids in this class. So in terms of the study, this is observational. Okay, now, should these statistics that they'll collect about how these bean plants grow, should we make any inferences about the bean plant population based on this class and their observation? What do we think? I could probably argue it either way. Would you make some kind of general conclusion about how bean plants grow? Like, what would be wrong with it if I made a general conclusion? Yeah.
I mean, if they're growing in the classroom, you could say maybe soil of the leaves or somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so they're growing inside, right? So maybe that doesn't reflect how they would grow outside. I could use that as a defense. What else could I maybe use? If I was growing a bean plant in my classroom in Indiana, would that be similar to growing a bean plant if I lived in California? No. Okay, so this is one class in one area. So in terms of, I mean, it's not totally invalid, but I would also say this one's not the best way for me to make inferences as a whole, because it's really just, it's one area, it's one class, and it's not a ton of a sample here. So that one, I would argue that as well. All right. Here's my next scenario. This one says, student council members ask every 10th student in lunch line if they like the cafeteria food. Okay, so my sample here, this is what we did yesterday. If you guys remember that, this is the systematic, because we're going to ask every 10th person. If you ask at a regular interval, that's the systematic. All right, and I'm going to ask every 10th student in the lunch line if they like the cafeteria food. What kind of study am I doing here? This is a survey because you're asking a question. Good. And I just tried to spell survey incorrectly. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is a survey. Now, if you're trying to figure out if the people in your school like the cafeteria food, would you say that whatever data they collect here would be decent? Yeah, I would say this, I think this is pretty good. I don't see any major bias in here, except for maybe one thing. Who am I not going to ask if they like the cafeteria food if I do this? What'd you say? Yes, you're not, anybody that packs their lunch, you could argue that here. You're not asking anyone who packs. So if you wanted to say, no, I wouldn't use this data, you could argue that in that way. Anybody that packs their lunch, they're not being asked the question because they're not in the lunch line. Or anybody that was absent that day. Not terrible. I think it's pretty good, but you could make an argument the other way, I think. All right. My next scenario says pharmaceutical company asks for volunteers to test a new drug to treat high blood pressure. Volunteers are randomly assigned to two groups. One group will receive the new drug. The other group will receive a placebo. They call that a sugar pill. Basically, it doesn't have any kind of effect on you when you take it. But they usually, in these cases, they don't tell the people which group they're in, so that way it won't affect mentally what's going on. It says the researchers will monitor blood pressure of the volunteers for 6 weeks. Okay, now, in terms of my sample here, these people volunteered, so this is going to be the self-selected in terms of the sample. What kind of study are we doing in this example? Controlled experiment again. All right, because I'm giving treatment to one group, but not the other. Now, do you guys think this is a decent one? Like, would you use the data that they collect here? I actually would argue to you that this is probably pretty good. Now, maybe what would be an argument that it would not be good? What would maybe be a reason why I wouldn't use this necessarily? Just your opinion, what do you think? Like, why would this maybe not be great? Yeah, you don't know which pill you're taking. That could affect the data. Yes, it could be. Right. Yeah, right. They don't have any. I don't know that caffeine is a placebo, but I do. It's withdrawal from the caffeine. Yeah. Don't ever start drinking coffee. You'll never stop. Okay. All right. Anyway, but you could argue like you could argue here again. You have volunteers, so maybe the people that wanted to participate in this have a blood pressure problem. You don't. It doesn't say anything about like do these people actually have issues with high blood pressure, things like that. So I could make an argument like volunteers. Like who are the people? They didn't say like the doctor's service said all these people have high blood pressure, let's encourage them to participate in this. It didn't say anything like that. And also the other thing, I have no idea how many people are we doing this with? It just says it assigns volunteers to two groups. So we could have 1,000 people, that would maybe be a good amount, but maybe I have 3 people. You know, we'd have to have 4 because we have even groups, but we have no idea. But in general, I would say this would probably be pretty good, but I could make an argument the other way too. All right, now this one, my next scenario, it says, in a study conducted at a high school in California, researchers compared the scholastic performance of music students with that of non-music students. Music students had a much higher GPA than the non-music students, and then they actually give examples of the GPAs. They must not be weighted here. And it says on top of that, 16% of the music students had all A's compared to only 5% of the non-music students. Okay, now it says they must have all the data for all of this. So in terms of a sample, I don't think there's a sample method here because it's probably just they're going to look at this for every single person in California. So this would be the whole population. And they're going to split it into students and non-music students, and that's just based on what you're taking, what classes you're taking. So that's not a specific type or strategy for a sample. What kind of study would you tell me they're doing here? this is kind of weird, but what kind of a study? I get all this information about these people's GPAs, probably just from a computer. What kind of study am I doing here? Yeah. Yeah, this is just, you're not affecting these people. You're just taking this data probably from some computer, so this is just observational. You're just gonna look at these people's GPAs and whether or not they're in the music class or not. Okay, now would you say that this kind of information, basically what I would say here, like if you're in music, you tend to have better grades, would be probably the argument. Do you think that's fair? Or like, would this data be good? Does anybody see a problem with it? I think it's probably just like looking at their GPA at the end of the year. Like at the end, so like at the end of your junior year or whatever, this is the GPA of all these people. 16% had all A's.
It's like such a small group within the whole school.
Well, I'm thinking they're literally taking the whole state of California, like every kid, and comparing.
Are they doing it just at one high school?
Oh, it is one high school. It is one high school. Okay.
It's like the music program, literally has like 30 kids.
Yeah, exactly. This could be good for this one school. Maybe it's like a you know how sometimes your high school you can like kind of target what area. Maybe this is a performing arts high school or something, and that's their focus. So maybe you could say something like that. Might be good for this one school. I would say lots of different factors. Like I wouldn't make an assumption necessarily about like, you know, the entire U.S. or the entire United States. Do you think this would hold true? We'd have to get more information. I think it would be good information for this one school, but not necessarily as a population of all high schools as a whole. Okay, and then you guys we're not going to design a survey, so do not worry about that last question. All right.